In today's episode, it's all about the Cyberpunk theme, and I'm using Black Widow as my inspiration. Let's check it out. Welcome to Day 7, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jason Ortega, and I thank you for joining me for another day of Photoshop. And as mentioned in the beginning, today's episode is completely dedicated to the Cyberpunk theme. This is a theme that has become very popular, so I wanted to show you step by step on how I created my Black Widow composition, which was the first time working within this style. So without any further ado, let's jump right into this. So with our background layer loaded in, we're going to press Command T and we're going to scale this up quite a bit, and we're just going to move this around to somewhere that looks pretty good for us. So something like this. And then we want to double click on that thumbnail to get into the original image, and we're going to select the patch tool, and we're just going to try to get rid of this little tile spot on the ground here. Then we can save that, get back into our original image, and using the marquee selection tool, we'll select this, press Command J to duplicate that into a new layer, and then we'll stretch this bottom portion out a little bit here. And as I'm stretching this out and moving it around, I'm just paying close attention to that reflection just to make sure everything lines up perfectly. Alright, now we want to paint black on that layer mask just to get rid of this harsh line. And we'll just touch it up just a little bit more. And that's looking pretty good. So we can load in now our Black Widow character, and since she's pretty large, we'll scale her down quite a bit. And then from here, I'm just going to quickly use the pen tool to create a selection of this back part of the background image, because I want to delete that. And essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to load in a city image, so that way we can have a little bit more depth to this overall composition. I want to make sure I still keep those lights because we're going to use that as part of our Cyberpunk effect. I love the color of them. So we'll finish this off here. And then we're going to right click, make a selection, and then fill that with black. And we'll do the same thing at the top, but I'm just going to speed through this part here. Okay, so with that finished now, we can go ahead and bring in our city image layer that's going to be our background. Then we can press Command T to bring up the transform box. We'll move this into a good position, scale it up a little bit, and it's really just about personal preference on where we want this. So something right here looks good. We'll press Enter, and then Command J to duplicate that. We'll move that layer to the top to fill in that space. And then we just want to move this to a point where it doesn't look like it's repeating any of the information from the layer below, and looks more like a continuation of the city. Now with the city done, we'll load in our car, which is a 3D asset that I got from Envato Elements, and we're just going to move this to, again, another spot that I think looks pretty good in the background. I don't want it to be directly behind Black Widow, but just kind of off to the side. Let's double click that thumbnail of the background layer to go into the original image, and using that spot healing brush tool, we're just going to clean up some of these wires in the background. Again, this is all about personal preference, but I just kind of found them to be a bit distracting for me. Okay, just a little more, and then we can go back into File, and then press Save, and jump into our original composition. Press T to bring up your text tool, and we're going to find a nice teal color that meshes well with that background. And the font that I'm going to be using is called Nippori. It is an Adobe font, and I can go ahead and just leave that information in the video description for you to reference later on. And what we're going to do with this text is we're going to create a message, and it's going to act as like this projected banner that is going to be moving across the railing of that top left corner of the composition. So I just wanted to come up with a name for this place that we're in, and for some reason, my mind went to Toy Story and I thought of Star Command. So essentially the message is going to read, "Welcome to Star Command." However, it's going to cut off, so you're not going to see the whole thing, just because that railing is too short and won't display the whole message. Then we're going to press Command T on that layer and transform that, bring it to the top, and we just want to position it so it fits nice and even on this railing. And after we do that, we'll right-click that layer, convert it to a smart object, add a layer mask, and then we're going to fill that little portion with black, just because the railing does come to an end. And let's go ahead and tweak this just a little bit more. And something right around here. Double-click that, and on Blend If, drag in those shadows on the bottom, just so it helps it blend in a little bit nicer. And these are actually going to be all of the elements that we're working with for this composition. Whenever I work on any new piece, I like to get all of my objects and subjects in place first. And then once they're set, then I like to go back in and start doing all the fine tuning and all that detailed work. And so since everything's in place for us now, we can go ahead and take that step and start blending everything together. All right, so first we want to change the color of this background. We're going to go ahead and add a gradient fill adjustment layer. And essentially we just kind of want to find those colors that are already in the background. So something that's purple, something that's blue. And now that we have our colors, we're just going to change the angle of this so it goes from left to right. And we'll clip that on the layer below. And then we're going to put this into a soft light blending mode. And let's drop the opacity so it's not too much in your face. And that looks pretty good. And using Blend If, we're just going to bring some of those dark portions of the underlying layer to come through. And then we'll add a color balance adjustment layer, clip it to that layer below, and then we're just going to enhance these colors just a bit more. So we'll still kind of stick to those same magenta, teals, and blues colors that we already have going on. And let's go ahead and take a quick look at before and after of this. Yeah, it's looking pretty good. From here, we can go into our blur gallery, add a field blur, and essentially we just want to create more of a contrast between our background and our subject, because we want to draw all of our attention more so to Black Widow and not so much our background layer. And you can see we actually missed that additional ground layer, so we'll convert that to a smart object, and then this time we'll just do a Gaussian blur, and we'll just kind of put something that matches the rest of that ground. So somewhere around here is looking nice. And let's load back in Black Widow and our car. And I'm just going to tweak this car up just a little bit. So we'll move this guy around, get him a little bit more out of the way. And with the car in place, we can go ahead and throw a Gaussian blur on that as well. Again, just to continue to create that contrast between Black Widow and our background. And then we want to create a blur on that city layer that's all the way in the back. And because that's even further away than our background layer, we want to increase the intensity of the blur. And that's looking right, so hit OK. I realize now I should have combined those two city layers, because now we're going to have to add a blur to this top portion as well. So we'll do that, hit OK, throw the text back in, and now we want to go ahead and put a blur on this to give you that impression that it's moving. So we're using the path blur. We'll put our two endpoints in, and then feel free to just play around with the speed portion, and then we can hit OK. And then on this duplicated layer, we'll double click on that to bring up our Blend If options, and we'll just bring in back some of those blacks from the background. And let's actually throw an outer glow on that as well. And I want to enhance the blur on this a little bit more, so we'll do another Gaussian blur. And to really sell the fact that this is a projection, we're going to throw some glow and light on there just beneath the text layer itself to help enhance that effect. And all I'm doing is holding down the Shift key as I keep clicking to create a straight line. And now we can find a blue color, and we're going to throw a glow on top of the text to help brighten this out just a little bit more. All I'm using is 10% opacity, and I'm just creating a couple of streaks over the text. I don't want to go overboard with this effect. We can even brighten up this projected light as well. Okay, from here, what I actually want to do is I want to enhance all of the current lighting elements in this background layer. So I'm just going to go over it a little bit and make them pop a little bit more. And I'm going to speed this up, so I'll see you in a second. Alright guys, things are looking pretty cool. We can go ahead and throw an overall glow on this left side here, and then we'll double click on that and bring back some of those dark portions from the layer below. Somewhere right there, hit OK. And with Black Widow gone, let's go ahead and add a levels adjustment layer. We'll clip it onto the background, and we can go ahead and just create a bit more contrast with this. Just a bit more fine tuning. This is all about personal preference. You might have something different that you like. And let's pick a pink color, and we're going to go in right around this light here, and we're just going to paint some of that light that's going to be reflected on the building itself. So just kind of some little areas here and there. Again, we just want to overall make this image a little bit brighter. And using our polygonal selection tool here, we'll just create a boundary to help paint some of that blue in. Same thing, bring back in some of the dark parts. And after we painted on some of this light, just play around with these blend modes. I use overlay and soft light a lot, but you know, every now and then I find one of these other ones to work pretty well. And especially working within this cyberpunk theme, this is where things start to get really tedious, where we're just constantly putting highlights and rim lights onto everything. Alright, let's direct our attention to the car. We can go ahead and throw a levels adjustment layer on there, and we can create some contrast with that, bring in the shadows, bring in the highlights. And things are pretty bright already, so now we can go ahead and add a color balance adjustment layer. And with just like that background layer, we're pretty much going to gravitate towards those cyans, blues, magentas, and that color scheme as well. I'm only using this color balance layer just to create a nice base color foundation, but you can see we have a lot more teals and blues to the left and magenta to the right. So I can use a hue and saturation adjustment layer, clip it onto the car, and push it more towards that magenta side. And pressing Command I will invert the mask, and then we can just paint some of that back in on the right side of the car. Alright, let's tweak this car a little bit more. And guys, I'm going to be honest with you, I can't even tell you how much time I spent just tweaking the position of the car. It was so annoying. I just couldn't get it to where I wanted it to be. But anyways, let's go back into the levels adjustment layer, and we're going to darken it up just a little bit. I know things are still pretty bright, but I want to darken it just a bit more. Okay, awesome. Let's add a levels adjustment layer to Black Widow now, so we can increase the contrast, bring in those shadows, and let's actually make sure it's clipped onto her. And we'll bring in the highlights, and we'll bring in the color balance adjustment layer. Just like what we did with the car, we'll create a nice working foundation to build off of. And this is essentially my process. I like to get my lighting and levels adjustments taken care of first. Then I can start to go in and do some of the color grading process. So we'll finish this up. And I'm actually going to go ahead and overall desaturate her just a little bit. Something like that. And this time, instead of using a hue and saturation adjustment layer, we're going to use color balance. And we're going to use this to help with our surrounding light. So first we'll kind of gravitate towards the cyans and blues, Command I to invert the mask, and then start to paint some of that on her left side. And then we're going to do the same thing with the right side of her. And that's the beauty of Photoshop, you know, there are several methods and processes that we can use to create that same result. And now I want to go ahead and create some highlights on her. So for the method that I'm going to use for this time, I'm going to use a levels adjustment layer and clip that onto her, and then really bring out these highlights. We'll invert the mask and then paint back some of the light all along the edges that I think that are going to be most affected by the surrounding light from the background. And I want more of this magenta color painted on her, so I'm going to use a hue and saturation adjustment layer, put it into colorize of the color that I want, invert that mask, and then just start to paint some of that back all alongside the face here. And now that we did that, we can repeat those same exact steps and work on the left side of her body here. So after we put it into colorize, we're just going to find a nice hue and saturation level that we like. Something like this. Command I to invert that mask, and we'll start painting that back in. I just want to exaggerate some of these colors on her just a bit more. And I'm just going around to some of these layers that we already have and just kind of doing some little touch-ups here and there. And just take your time with it. I find the results to be best when we're not rushing through everything. Just slowly build up the process. And we're going to add a second highlight here. So adding an exposure adjustment layer will increase the intensity of those highlights. Command I to invert the mask. And just along some of these edges here, we're going to paint that back to, again, exaggerate some of these bright spots on her. I want to point out too that I'm working with 100% opacity with a lot of this and just painting on the outside of the edges. Okay, our character's looking pretty awesome right now. And one method that I like to use to help not only tie in all of these different components of the composition, but to also just kind of give it a bit more character, is I like to give it a little bit of a haze effect. And so we're going to go back into our brushes, and I'm going to use one of my custom cloud brushes. And with that selected, let's click on our foreground color, find a nice purple, pink color to use on the right side. We'll hit OK, and then a couple of dabs there. We'll do the same thing for the left side of this. A couple of dabs here. And then on a layer mask, we'll paint away some of that since it's a bit too much. We'll do the same thing with our previous layer. And from here, we can just drop the opacity overall on this so it's not so much in your face. And since on that right side, I only really want the top of the haze to be pink, I'm adding a hue and saturation adjustment layer. And I'm just going to find a nice hue and saturation color to work with to use for the bottom portion. And then we can go ahead and invert that mask and paint back just the bottom side of that. It's a subtle adjustment, but I really like it. We can go ahead and apply those same steps with the haze on the left side as well. So just play around with the hue and saturation and find something that works in your favor. Invert the mask and paint some of that back. And before we wrap things up, I actually want to add a brightness and contrast adjustment layer to the car, and I just want to darken it up just a bit more. And I think this is just about going to do it. Yeah, guys, this looks great. What we can go ahead and do now is merge all of these layers together. So if you're using a Mac, you can go ahead and press Shift Command Option E, or if you're using a PC, you can press Shift Control Alt E. And what this will do is merge all of this together and put it into a new layer. And then we can right click that layer, convert it to a smart object, and then go into the camera raw filter where we will do our final touch-ups in here. And just like many other artists, I too prefer to end things with the camera raw filter. This filter is honestly just extremely powerful, and you can do so much with it. I like to do my final level adjustments, do some final color grading in there, and sharpen it up quite a bit. And a lot of times I like to use the vignette effect as well. This filter is also great working and isolating individual colors, and you can play around with selected tones to increase the luminosity, or if you want to darken them up, you can do that as well. And I'm just going to go ahead and stop talking, and I'll let you see the rest of my process working with this filter. And let's go ahead and take one more look at how things looked like before and after the camera raw filter. Yeah, it is amazing what this filter can do. And thank you to everyone that watched this video today. I really hope you enjoyed this Cyberpunk tutorial effect. If you enjoyed it and want to see more like this in the future, please hit that subscribe button as well as click that bell icon to stay notified for future videos, and I hope to see you again tomorrow for our next video. We'll see you soon.